The Necromancer has been defeated and he has been captured, held in a prison beyond any normal person's reach. Still, we have to take over and destroy his workshops and the Palace of Bone. The Necromancer's fortress near the planet's magnetic North Pole, far beyond the northern vortex, an eternal storm beginning at 66 degrees north, and the workshop is even further north than the eternal storm, beyond the reach of even the most powerful armies and nations on the planet. The only reason so many of us had arrived here is because we have godly allies who were able to create and open paths, who took us beyond the edges of the northern vortex and into the eye of the storm where the Palace of Bone was built. We are fairly certain that the Necromancer didn't create the northern vortex, but he did take advantage of it by building his palace here, a towering palace of 7 towers that dwarf even the clouds of smoke above. Surrounding the palace were the factories. 12 massive brutalist structures that are the size of townships, with pipes, chimneys, sky bridges, and even machines that are hundreds of meters wide. Our camps surround the dark factories, our lights are fireflies before a behemoth of shadows. There are heroes from across time, at least one hunter from every hunter's guild, powerful monsters from all over the world and beyond, mercenaries being paid by wealthy patrons, soldiers being paid by their tax dollars, villains who agreed to fight because it was their world as well, people who didn't fit as hero, villain, nor neither. Then there were beings that didn't fit with neither person nor beast. Even with the size of our army, we were so few before the machinations of the Palace of Bone. Even with the Necromancer imprisoned, that did not mean that his evil was stopped. He still had prisoners in his palace, some alive, most dead. They deserved their freedom as well. And then there were the esoteric reasons for bringing the palace down, along with all of the factories. The Necromancer's power is great, but he could only carry so much of it with him at all times. He has to keep most of his power somewhere else. His collected knowledge, his minions, his raw material, his magic, and his treasures were all stored in the Palace of Bone and the factories. To explain it using an analogy, the Necromancer's power by himself was like a smartphone. It could store decent information and do a lot of useful tasks. However, it was limited in information, electricity, and even processing power. The palace was like a server farm. It stored so much information, electricity, and processing power that millions of phones could not equal it. Where the Necromancer was at this time, he could not access this power. However, having such power out there that he could reach if we lost our focus for even a few minutes, that wasn't safe. Not to mention the fact that leaving such a place of power in place, even if the Necromancer never escaped, someone or something else would find the Palace of Bone. It may take a very long time for them to use its power, but that is quite a bit of power, and an empty throne is a dangerous thing to have in this world. So it is here, in one of the tents, where I helped plan the assault. I helped advise the assault, using advanced technology that allowed me to connect in real time to captains leading the assault, where I could see what they can see, hear what they can hear, and even offer real-time advice. I am one of a dozen, each of whom leads hundreds, who in turn lead thousands. The assault has begun. My division has 3 battalions with 30 captains, and we focus on our factory. The factory was hundreds of stories tall with no doors and windows. Explosives were placed and a hole was blown, allowing our forces to flood inside. The first factory floor was a place of suffering. It was clear the Necromancer had started to automate some of his unholy harvest. The conveyor belts carried body parts from one end of the floor to the other. Automated arms, saws, and sewing machines assembled mismatched bodies from the flesh, and the body parts preserved by the freezing cold. Body parts that still squirmed from pain and fear as the bodies were assembled, their bodies rejecting each part, at war with itself, and the suffering made worse as they were assembled in full, and at the end of the assembly line, they began the process of disassembling the bodies. When fully assembled and in pain, before these poor flesh toys could adjust to their bodies and their existence, they were disassembled again. Their nerves were removed last. As they were disassembled, the removed body parts placed back on the piles to be assembled again. One of the most common sources for necromantic energy was suffering and pain. You can't get something for nothing. Something has to be given up. One person can only feel so much pain, though. If you take hundreds of them apart and put them back together and kept it going, that kind of energy will keep both of these machines going and keep the body parts living, even if there was no mind left. Already there was chatter among the soldiers as I called out to the Captain Phoenix Princess. I asked her to set the room on fire, which she did with eager ease. Machines and flesh both burned to ash in seconds, and the factory floor screeched to a halt as her men moved on to the next flesh toy floor. I wish there was something to save the body parts. However, they were created to suffer, and there wasn't really a way to stop the cycle. They are designed to suffer, and even if you stop their pain, that would only kill them. All I can do is hope that they appreciate what we did for them. On a different floor of the factory, toys were being built, and we found our first survivors. This squad was led by Captain Love, and she was a good choice for the floor, as we saw the children chained to the assembly line, as they assembled handheld game devices and other electronics. Their eyes were desperate, and it wasn't the children who were the threats, but those who oversaw them. They looked alive. They walked normally, and they were completely relaxed. It was their eyes that gave them away, a constant sense of relief that you could see at all times, the eyes of someone who was finally at peace, even when they were bleeding and in pain, they were relieved just to be alive. The most loyal minions of the Necromancer, the possessed. Souls freed from pandemonium and placed into bodies that were not their own, forcing the bodies back to life. Free of the pain and agony of hell, they were all willing to follow the Necromancer's words to the ends of the earth and beyond. Because serving the Necromancer meant that it was time away from their judgment. Even a few seconds free of hell was enough to make them eager to follow every order, no matter how vile. They were hoping to serve entire lifetimes to the Necromancer, serving from body to body until their sentences finally ran out. They wouldn't just fight us, they would fight to the death, which is not easy to do, since the bodies are bound to the body, rather than biologically supported by the body. They did, however, have a major weakness, as they soon discovered, when they tried to aim their guns at Captain Love, only to find they couldn't pull the trigger. Captain Mercy Love, or the Devil's Daughter, could not be harmed by any denizen of Pandemonium. Demon, damned, devil, debutante, duke, duchess, defiler, or desecrator. It made no difference. The souls may be pulled out of hell by the necromancer's power, but that didn't mean that the devil's daughter was powerless here. She spoke a single word that echoed through the hall as every single possessed body that heard her word fell to the floor dead, and their souls returned to Pandemonium. Leave, Mercy said, through the floor as she and her soldiers quickly went to work, releasing children. and bringing them back outside to where the children of Ifengia could care for the lost children, hopefully reuniting them with their families, and for the others who had no families, we can just do our best to find a home for them. I reminded Mercy to look out for other possessed who didn't hear her words, and just because they couldn't harm her didn't mean they couldn't harm the others. She affirmed she heard my call as I got a notification that Hush needed my help. I switched to her view. She was with both Birthstone, her partner, and with Azam the Mighty, Hush's ancestor. Both Hush and her ancestor were once dancers who became heroic and then gigantic, where it was being heroic that made them powerful. Being powerful didn't make them heroes. Birthstone was not as big as the other two, but she could change her size, which made her useful, as they made it into the throughway of the factory, smashing the massive machines that powered the factory and redirected pain, energy, smoke, blood, and flesh through the factory. The heart of the factory and the power source of the server, so to speak. Thankfully, it seems the Necromancer didn't bother with curses nor traps, which makes sense. They can be costly to maintain and can be used against you. And when you have so much time, they will stop working long before you need them. Still, though, it was odd there wasn't more security in the throughway of the factory. All of the fiends, possessed, and Draugen were easily crushed underfoot. At the end of the throughway, where the factory met the palace, there was a massive door made of steel. Not old steel and rust, either, unlike most of the machines of the factory. The steel was polished and it looked like it belonged to a bank vault designed by giants. It dwarfed even the 20-meter tall Hush. The mechanism was a simple turn dial, which Azam was spinning, massive chainmail glinting in the gas lights of the factory, while Hush was a bit more cautious. "Can you translate this word over the door?" he asked as I saw what she was talking about. A word written in Ademic, but it wasn't written to represent a word in the language, but it was phonetic, making it hard for me to make the connection to what it meant until I said the word out loud. "Get tight," I told Hush, not immediately making the connection, but when I did, I warned Hush. "Prepare for some big trouble just behind that door," I warned her, as she readied her trident and Azam was in her final spin of the door, massive crook and sword at the ready. "What possible trouble could be behind that door?" she asked me as I answered. Thankful for my years of study at Agamemnon's. Goliath was a get tight, I told her, as the door finally spun open, and behind the door was what the Necromancer created from Goliath's body. He was tall, at least 25 meters tall, so tall he had to duck beneath the door that he was guarding. He was barefoot on the frozen ground, which revealed that he did indeed have 6 fingers on both hands and 6 toes on both feet. His armor was steel plate and attached to his body by being screwed into his bone. His helmet covered the top of his head, with his eyes moved to his shoulders, peering forward through bloodshot eyes. His lower jaw had all of the flesh removed, metal plates and blades replacing teeth and skin. It opened unnaturally wide as he tried to scream, but no sound came out. His vocal cords cut. He lunged towards Azam, who raised her arm and let him bite down on her gauntlet. She dragged him along, but the bite pressure was so great it was already scratching and denting the armor on her near unbreakable plate. While Birthstone tried to pull Goliath off of her companion, and Hush hurriedly asked, "What is this, and how do we kill it?" she asked me, and I began to explain. "Mechanical monstrosity. Most of his organs have been replaced by mechanical devices, and it keeps him in great pain, as his brain has electrical wire running through it, piloting his body. The more damage to his body, the more his body will be replaced by nanotechnology that acts like stem cells. The good news is it will take hours to replace any serious damage. The bad news is the machines will keep adapting even if it takes time. If you remove the heart, you can destroy the machine keeping him going. He won't start out too intelligent, but something you have to remember. Before I could finish, Goliath stopped trying to bite Azam as he lunged for Hush, and she let out a yelp as she fell back and launched Goliath into a support column. The factory ceiling shook, and Goliath stood to unsteady legs as he started bleeding from a wound on his back. Already it was being stitched by golden wires, which was quicker than I thought it would happen. I wanted to finish what I was telling her. However, the fight with Goliath definitely took priority. Any weaknesses? I left my sling at home, Hush quipped towards me, which drew a titter from both Azam and Birthstone. They would both be well aware of the story of Goliath, and quite honestly, it was one of the few cultural references they were all going to get. Poor balance is likely still a weakness. Knock him down, damage him quicker than he can heal, then take out his heart. However, after you've done that, you need to be ready to keep fighting because Goliath has, before I could finish, he lunged again towards Birthstone, biting at her legs as she screamed and started kicking his head over and over as Azam and Hush targeted his chest. Sword and trident swinging and trying to break through the metal ribs to try and get to his heart as the wounds kept healing, and finally Azam swung her sword towards the giant's neck as the flesh was cut, and Birthstone's stomps finally broke through the metal, stress far better than the blade did. Despite being shorter than Hush, Birthstone was significantly heavier, so that meant that her stomps hit a lot harder than Hush's would have. With the head removed, the body stopped moving, but the wire still squirmed, and they still tried to connect the head and the body. Take the head away, maybe we can force it to try and heal from more than it can recover from, I said as Birthstone kicked the head across the throughway, almost half a kilometer away, as the wires kept trying to reach across and reconnect the body, now harmless, as it tried to heal, and finally they broke open the chest using the blades that revealed what was in Goliath's chest. His organs were replaced a long time ago. His torso was practically all mechanical, with wires tensing and relaxing as they replaced muscle. His stomach was glass and full of green acid that digested food for chemical energy. The lungs were completely gone, and the heart was made from golden gears that wires flowed out of. Hush stabbed her bone trident into the heart, and the heart broke, leaving the body still. Well, that wasn't too hard. So, you wanted to tell me something about Goliath? Was it a fun fact? Hush asked, and I answered, well, sort of. What I wanted to say was that Goliath had 3 sons and a brother, all of whom were just as large as him, I told her as she turned to the darkness of the doorway, where 4 more pairs of eyes could be seen. While they turned to face Goliath's family, I got a notification from Hamilliker. I have an incoming message. Do you have this without my help? I asked as the 4 giants lunged towards them. Azam cut 2 different giant heads off with a single stroke, while Birthstone held off the other 2 giants by hand. Don't worry, we got this. Get your goddamn teeth off of my motherfucking leg! Hush yelled, while a severed head, with a wire still connected to the heart, bit at her shoe, and she was busy trying to kick it away. Fortunately, mechanical monstrosities are not contagious. It takes weeks of work to build even one on a human scale. The Gittites likely took years, if not decades, to work on. So they were fine. Plus, knowing Hush swearing at her work while she was doing it was part of her fighting process. Hello, Hamilliker. How are things? I asked the gentleman mercenary, an exoteric mercenary from Kart Hadash. very well experienced and very dangerous. He was one of the only known exoteric mercenaries with confirmed exemy, esoteric, and enigmatic kills. He was also one of the most loyal men I have ever met. He negotiates contracts clearly, and he's willing to go through with his job to the best of his ability. He was a captain over a large group of mercenaries and exiles, so it was odd for him to call for assistance. We have a problem. We found a T-junction that leads to both the library and the treasure room, and, well, all of the mercenaries headed to the treasure room. I wanted to confirm how you wanted me to proceed. He asked me, and I checked the camera, and sure enough, I could see the choices, treasure room, and library. Don't bother with the treasure room, it's not your goal. Take yourself and the exiles to the library. The top priority is securing the books. They will be distributed to the docents of the halls of time. I told him, and he affirmed what I said, and he asked, "What do you want me to do about the mercenaries who left for the treasure room? Should I send in a squad, or maybe just head after them myself after the library is secured?" He asked me, and I responded, "Don't bother. They're already dead. It says on the door, this is not a place of honor in Endemic. We will be sending in the Star Sailor, Ares, and MSU cleanup teams there. The gold is highly radioactive and will slog off the flesh off your bones in minutes," I told him directly. He didn't even pause before he confirmed, and he made his way right to the library. I have seen many libraries in my life. You get to a certain degree of power and you start keeping books to reference all of the little things you need to keep track of, and to also keep track of your own history. There was knowledge in that library that was likely irreplaceable, that would give context and information on the Necromancer's whereabouts across the millennia. While there would be the cost of blood to access that information, the docents in the Hall of Time would share it freely, while also keeping the dangers of the books contained. At least, that was the goal. When Hamilcar arrived at the library, instead of shelves full of books, they were all empty. Rows upon rows of empty bookshelves, all empty, without a single book on any of them. Even the pages that would have been running the library for the Necromancer were gone. They must have evacuated immediately when the attack began. But that's gonna be a headache later. But for now, destroy the shelves and move on. We have to make it to the palace proper, I said as the exiles and Hamilcar started destroying the shelves, and I quickly went over the cameras to see if anyone needed my help. The exiles were former helpers of the Necromancer, those who willingly sought him out for power or wisdom, and then they would disobey him, usually by refusing to kill someone. So they were exiled to the wastes where they created the elf villages throughout the northern vortex. A lot of them volunteered to help us in taking the Palace of Bone. We believed that there was a cure for the curse in the libraries of the Necromancer. But if there was no library, there was no cure. They would be stuck in the northern vortex until a cure was found or the curse was understood. Still, at least freedom from the shadow of the Necromancer was a start, and they knew we would try to help them. So that was a relief, although I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart, knowing that even by helping our allies and doing my very best, I still failed in doing what I promised them. And that was before the fact that the Necromancer's little helpers were free out in the world with his collection of books, his knowledge, his power, and his magic in their hands. Sure, we can disable the power and magic in the Palace of Bone, which helps the world immensely, but there would still be consequences from this night. And already I was plotting in the back of my mind what I would need to do to help track these books down. Having successfully checked everyone else's cameras, I checked in on Hush again. I came in at just the right moment with Hush lifting her trident over her head, and the last giant's heart was on the floor in a pile of broken golden wires as she let out a victorious yell. I am Hush Puppy, destroyer of evil, she said with the trident over her head. Take it easy, it's just a mechanical monstrosity, I told Hush, who glanced into the dark doorway leading to the palace. What is with you and making all of your monster names start with the same letter? She asked me, and I shrugged before I responded. I like alliteration, where possible. Besides, it wasn't like anyone else was naming most of these monsters, but it looks like the others have just about finished their factories too, so we should get ready to head into the palace itself, I told her as I checked in with the demolition crew as they laid out the charges. Charges that would only go off with the signal and only when everyone living had left the palace. It would render the machines irreparable and have the building collapsed with no surviving rooms, melting the ice enough to bury it under tons of ice that would be unsalvageable by even the most advanced technology available. It was tempting to leave some of it to be studied or even salvaged. However, it was decided by those in charge that with the exception of the books, that everything in the Palace of Bone was too dangerous to keep around, even for study. Even if we tried to repurpose the suffering or redirect the energy for other use, the temptation to create more of the energy would be there. It would be far too easy to use the power of suffering to power a country, and only then for the country to decide that suffering and pain was a small price to pay for energy. Plenty of countries were willing to sacrifice their populace, their future, and the future of the planet in pursuit of energy. A device that directly converts the suffering to energy. The Empire, the Seven Cities, the Middle Kingdom, and even Kart Kadash have already asked to get the plan so they could attach it to their hospitals and they could just organically gain energy from the patients. Again, the temptation was great. The Themis, the Titan of Justice and one of the leaders of this attack, refused. It may start by trying to benefit from it passively, and there would be people who would refuse to take it further, maybe even a large part of the government. But as long as there was a benefit to harming others, then there would always be a justification to causing that harm. It would be too easy to reduce anesthetic during a surgery to increase pain to try and get that ratio of pain to healing where there was enough pain without hurting the healing, and then there would be a need to increase the energy. There was always a need for growth, industry, capital, disaster, or even just simple greed. There would come a time when there was a need for more energy, so they would cause pain themselves. They may say it was just once or it's only temporary, but the need will only grow as they realize they can get more energy. The justification would get easier and more pain would be drawn. Anyone who objected would be moved elsewhere, or they would be persuaded that it was for the greater good, so that it meant that it was okay. It may seem impossible until you see the industries out there that thrive from causing pain and causing scarcity. There's so many people in them that convince themselves that it was for the greater good, that it was just how things were, and Themis decided that humanity wasn't in a place where it could gain energy from suffering, not without causing more suffering. And I agree with her. I have seen too much pain in the world, too many people who would have sacrificed others for their own benefit, and far too many who would have convinced themselves that their own pain is for the benefit of the world. If there was an actual machine that could turn pain into energy, There would be people eager to use that machine, and there would be people eager to be that source, as long as someone was telling them it was to benefit everyone else. I got a notification that the other factories were cleared and it was now time to enter the Palace of Bone. I directed Mercy Love to enter first, supported by Hush and Phoenix Princess. Inside the palace itself, we found entire walls full of nothing, frozen bodies. Bodies that were still conscious, but not alive. Phoenix Princess's power melted them from their prison and burned their bodies away, freeing their souls. I felt another twinge in my heart. These people were innocent. Slaves of the Necromancer, frozen when he got bored of them, acting as batteries of suffering and energy that he could access, forced to obey him at any time. Only by melting the ice that replaced their bones could they be free. For a lot of them, it was a mercy freeing them from hell. For others, we must have seemed like monsters. We were monsters. Unable to undo the Necromancer's curse, all we could do was offer them death or leave them enslaved and frozen. We didn't even give them a chance to say what they wanted. The decision was made that it was better to free them for judgment. The orders weren't mine, and it wasn't me who set them ablaze. I even let Themis, Adansi, and Hades know my objections. They only agreed that I wouldn't be a part of the immolation. They would not agree to let them endure. In their eyes, death was a greater mercy, and giving them a choice was something that we could not offer, because we could not give them freedom. I changed the camera away from the flames that consumed over the frozen bodies, and those who worked on the Necromancer's experiments. Most of those who worked on the experiments stood still while the flames washed over them, ready for death or maybe not caring anymore. Others ran. The heroes refused to immolate those who ran. Our hearts could not bear it when there was no longer the benefit of the doubt. And that was where the villains shone, eager to chase them down and bring fire upon them. Their hearts unburdened and unburned as they laughed at those who tried to run or defend themselves. Another weight on my heart as I flipped through the cameras, hoping to look away. But even if I could find a single camera without flames visible, that did not mean that our crimes weren't happening, and that guilt would be there. It took hours for the last frozen body to be incinerated, but when we were certain, we moved on to the throne room in the center of the palace. This part I felt no guilt, and we were all united in the throne's destruction. The throne was esoteric in nature, but the most dangerous part of the throne wasn't the magic it held, but what the throne symbolized. Symbols have power. They can unite, they can destroy, they can inspire, they can dishearten, they can serve as focal points of power, and there are few symbols more dangerous than an empty throne. It means that it's a target someone will seek out that throne to keep it. Someone will seek out that power, someone who could be worse than the Necromancer. If we destroy the Necromancer's throne, then there would be nothing left for the Necromancer to build his kingdom around. Sure, we took him, we stripped his power, most of his loyal minions were dead, and the rest were gone. His palace would be shattered, and large parts of it were melted. Still, as long as the throne stood, there would be that hope that it could be rebuilt, and it is there that we have to destroy that hope. And even if we destroy the throne, that may not destroy the hope that the Necromancer would return. But it would be hell of a start of making the world a better place. The throne was unassuming, red velvet over a golden frame with sculpted skulls where the hands were made to rest. The room was empty save for the throne. The walls were ice, and above, the ceiling showed the night sky, letting a few snowflakes fall below. It was quick work destroying the throne. Phoenix Princess and Red Prince both focused elemental attacks. Fire and lightning danced along the throne, melting the gold, burning the velvet, and within minutes it was melted slag beneath the ice that thawed and refrozen over the throne, leaving nothing left of the throne, and the necromancer's power was truly conquered. My heart did feel lighter as they left the Palace of Bone, and with the last of us free, we watched together as the palace and the factories fell. The explosion could be heard for kilometers as the leftover ruins melted the ice, falling deeper and deeper into the ice, beyond even our sight, as the seawater froze again, leaving only the crater itself and the smoke clouds above as evidence that the necromancer was ever here. And even then, the clouds above were starting to clear. It would take a long time for the smoke to clear, and even longer for the last traces of esoteric corruption to dissipate. Still, the process for healing could begin. While that part was done, we had to deal with the other consequences of what removing the Winterman from the world was going to do. The Necromancer was evil, he was cruel, he was darkness etched into the history of the planet. It would not take long for many ambitious, evil people to fill the void that he left behind. What was a harder role to fill was his role as the Winterman, the gift giver who visited the world during the winter, giving gifts. To leave a role like that empty would have harsh consequences since many people did come to expect the Winterman's gifts, especially those who never paid his price. Thankfully, we had a few different people who were willing to fill in his role as the Winterman. Granny Grayla and all of her children were willing to help. Krampus was willing to punish the troublemakers. Many witches were eager to meet the children and show them the joy of magic. Mary Lloyd and her helpers also were willing. And finally, there was the old immortal, the man who escaped Lady Bathory and who sought out his own redemption for the evil he had done across the centuries in her name. One of the last of his kind, and he was eager to bring joy the world over. And by being immortal, he may serve this role temporarily, or he may serve it truly forever. Nicholas would lead the exile elves in bringing joy to the world, even if the elves were unable to leave the northern vortex. He would give them some control over their lives back, and he would seek out a cure for their curse. So, at least as far as the role the Winterman serves in winter, would be covered by Nicholas the Halcyon, Granny Grayla, Krampus, Mary Lloyd, countless elves, witches, and little miracles that would bring joy the world over. Something that certainly lightened a lot of hearts, but I would still have one final task to do, a failure I would have to explain. I returned to Samantha Williams' house in Swamp City. Dawn has arrived in Swamp City, but it is 3 hours away in National City. Adansi awaits for me outside. As a goddess, she knows why what I have to say is important. As my daughter, she hates to see me so sad, so she waits for me outside. I knock on the door, and I am let inside Samantha's house by Samantha's nurse, working even on Christmas Day. Samantha is lying on a bed full of tubes and wires, unable to speak. Death would be coming for her soon, but thankfully death is waiting for Samantha to see her son again. Instead of seeing her son for one last time, I only have news of his death. I apologize to her, and I tell her that every one of the frozen fiends were incinerated to free their souls. We have no way of knowing which was her son, let alone which ashes were his. All of the ashes looked the same and mixed with the ice in the same way. Even being unable to speak, I could tell Samantha was angry at me, with her heart rate monitor beeping faster. I let her feel her anger as I continued my apology. I tell her I am sorry we could not return her son to her, and that she couldn't say goodbye to him. I reassured her that we freed his soul and that she would see him in the sunless lands. Hades promised to let all of the passed on souls the chance to speak to their loved ones, regardless of their judgment. Still, this did not sate her anger. The beeping only got faster as tears fell from my face, and I apologized again. I did so much right. I helped free thousands. I freed the world from the shadow of the Necromancer, and my efforts would bring joy to billions, possibly for the rest of eternity. But in that moment, I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a success. I was just someone who made a promise to give a mother a final chance with her son. I wouldn't have been able to find the Necromancer without her help, and all she wanted in exchange for that information was a chance to say goodbye. I did everything I could, and it wasn't enough to keep my promise. All I could do was sit with her, reassure her that her son was free. I waited until the beeping changed tone and the nurse ran into Samantha's room, trying to restart her heart. I left the house, staring forward at nothing, not feeling the cold air, nor feeling any joy nor victory in what I had done. I made a promise, and even if I made the world a better place, I still broke that promise, and I wasn't going to let it go easily. Ndaya sat across from me, and Adansi sat next to me. The silence said a lot. I know that there was a lot I did that was right. The world is better because of it, but my nature as a journalist means I need to record it all, both good and bad, so that the stories are accurate. We made it home to National City where I met the rest of my family, and we had so many smiles and joy shared. Even if it wasn't perfect, even when I sometimes forgot how to smile, even if the sadness felt like it was too much, I took a breath and I moved forward with my moment, happy to spend time with my family. I lived. Many people weren't so lucky, and as much joy that I felt that day, I know that joy will continue and that others will feel it as well. By the time the sun set on Christmas, my heart felt lighter. Guilt was still there, the pain was still there, but knowing that I helped make the world better made it easier to bear. I have a lot of work for the next year, many stories to tell, but for this moment and tonight, I will rest knowing I did good. Even if I rest on easy, at least I can rest.